The gunshot that ended Samuel Gerard's life in the dusty street of Fort Bridger, Wyoming, on that sweltering August morning in 1874, was the same bullet that destroyed Grace Kelley's reputation forever. Grace stood at the window of the boarding house, her hands pressed against the glass, watching as the men carried Samuel's body away on a rough wooden door someone had torn from its hinges. Her mind couldn't process what had happened. One moment, Samuel had been arguing with a card sharp named Dalton over a poker game gone wrong. The next, Samuel lay bleeding in the street while Dalton rode out of town before the sheriff could even load his gun. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, appeared at Grace's elbow. Her face was pinched with something between pity and disgust. "You'll need to collect your things, Miss Kelley. I cannot have an unwed woman with child residing under my roof. It isn't proper." Grace turned slowly. "But Samuel and I were to be married next week. The banns have already been posted at the church." "Next week might as well be never now," Mrs. Henderson said, not unkindly, but with the firmness of a woman who had her own reputation to protect. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I have other boarders to think of. You have until tomorrow morning." The door closed, and Grace sank onto the narrow bed that had been hers for the past 3 months, since she'd arrived in Fort Bridger from Ohio. She pressed a hand to her belly, where Samuel's child grew, barely 3 months along but already changing everything. Back in Cincinnati, her family had disowned her when they'd learned she was running away to marry a Wyoming cowhand. Her father had called her a fool. Her mother had wept. Her older brother had told her never to darken their doorstep again. She'd burned every bridge to be with Samuel, and now Samuel was dead. The next morning, Grace found herself standing in the street with her single carpet bag, watching the sun rise over the mountains. She had $17 to her name. The cheapest room in town cost $20 a month, and no respectable boarding house would take an unmarried pregnant woman anyway. The alternatives were grim. The saloon, where soiled doves worked upstairs, or the road out of town toward poverty and probable death. She was contemplating which direction to walk when a shadow fell across her path. "Miss Kelley." Grace looked up into the weathered face of a man she'd seen around town but never spoken to. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a winter storm. He wore dusty work clothes and boots that had seen hard use, and he held his hat in his hands with awkward courtesy. "Yes," she managed. "Name's Isaac Foster. I worked with Samuel on the Rockingham Ranch." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I heard about your situation. The whole town's heard." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I see. I have a proposition for you." Isaac's voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Nothing improper. I have a homestead about 8 miles north of here. 160 acres, a decent house, a barn. Been working it for 2 years now." Grace waited, her heart beating strangely. "You need a name for that baby," Isaac continued, his eyes focused somewhere over her left shoulder. "And I could use a wife. Not for anything you might be thinking," he added quickly. "The work's too much for one person. I need help with the chickens, the garden, the cooking. I can pay you in respectability and a roof over your head. You can pay me back in work, that's all. You want to marry me?" Grace's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm proposing a business arrangement," Isaac clarified. "You need protection and I need help. The preacher doesn't need to know the particulars." Grace looked down at her carpet bag, then back at this strange man offering her a lifeline. "Why would you do this? You don't know me." For the first time, Isaac's eyes met hers directly. What she saw there surprised her, a deep, bone-weary loneliness that mirrored something inside herself. "Samuel was a good man," Isaac said quietly. "He talked about you all the time at the ranch." how you were clever and brave to come all this way, how you made him want to be better. A man like that deserves to have his child born with a name and a future. I can give you that much at least. And what do you get out of this? Isaac's jaw tightened. Company. Purpose. Someone to cook something besides beans and hardtack. Does it matter? Grace studied him for a long moment. There was no deception in his face, only a stark honesty that was almost painful to witness. She thought about her choices. Accept this stranger's offer or face certain ruin. All right, she said. I'll marry you. They were wed that afternoon by a confused but cooperative preacher, with the general store owner and his wife as witnesses. Grace wore her best dress, a blue calico that was already getting tight around the middle. Isaac wore the same work clothes he'd had on that morning, though he'd made an effort to brush the dust off. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Isaac went pale and merely nodded at Grace before turning to sign the marriage certificate. They rode to his homestead in a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Isaac didn't speak during the journey, and Grace was too overwhelmed to attempt conversation. She watched the landscape change from the rough buildings of Fort Bridger to open prairie dotted with sage and wildflowers. The Wind River Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in August. The homestead, when they reached it, was better than Grace had dared hope. The house was small but solidly built, with real glass windows and a stone chimney. The barn stood nearby, flanked by a chicken coop and a small corral where several horses watched their arrival with interest. A creek ran through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. "It's not much," Isaac said, breaking his silence, "but it's sound. Roof doesn't leak." "It's lovely," Grace said honestly. Isaac helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful and impersonal on her waist. "I'll show you the house." Inside, the house was sparse but clean. The main room held a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace and a small shelf of books. A curtain divided off what must be the bedroom. Grace could see a narrow bed through the gap. "You'll take the bed," Isaac said, following her gaze. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." "That's not necessary. This is your home. You're carrying a child. You need proper rest." His tone left no room for argument. "I'll bring in your things." That first night, Grace lay in Isaac's bed, surrounded by his scent leather and wood smoke, and something clean like pine, and wondered what she'd done. She was married to a complete stranger, living in the middle of nowhere, carrying another man's child. A few tears escaped before she could stop them, grief for Samuel mixing with fear of this uncertain future. In the main room, she could hear Isaac moving around quietly, settling in for the night on the floor. She wondered if he was having similar doubts. The next morning, Grace woke to find Isaac already gone. A fire burned in the hearth and a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. She found bread and butter laid out on the table, along with a jar of preserves. A note, written in careful script, read, "Gone to check the fence line. Back by noon." Grace ate her breakfast and then explored her new home more thoroughly. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar. She found a good supply of canned vegetables and fruits, probably purchased in town. Everything was organized with military precision. She spent the morning cleaning, though the house hardly needed it. It gave her something to do with her hands while her mind tried to adjust to this new reality. By noon, she had bread dough rising and a stew simmering on the stove. Isaac returned exactly when he'd said he would, leading his horse into the barn. He came to the house, stopped at the door to remove his boots, and entered in his sock feet. "Smells good," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I hope you like beef stew. I found vegetables in the larder." I like anything I don't have to cook myself. He washed his hands in the basin by the door. Thank you. They ate in awkward silence, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound. Grace searched for something to say, some way to bridge the strange distance between them. "How long have you been in Wyoming?" she finally asked. Isaac looked up from his bowl. 4 years. Came from Kansas after the war. You fought?" "Yes." The single word was clipped, discouraging further questions on that topic. Grace tried again. "Samuel mentioned the Rockingham Ranch." "You don't work there anymore. Left 6 months ago to focus on the homestead. The Army granted me the land for my service. Figured I should make something of it." Isaac paused. "Samuel was planning to file for his own claim. He talked about building a house for you, starting a small herd." The mention of Samuel sent a sharp pain through Grace's chest. He wrote such wonderful letters about Wyoming. He made it sound like paradise. It can be. It can also be brutal. Isaac's eyes softened slightly. "He loved you very much. His last words before he died, he said your name." Grace's hand trembled and she set down her spoon. "You were there. I heard the shot. Got there just after. He didn't suffer long." Isaac hesitated, then added, "He made me promise to look after you if anything happened to him. I suppose I'm keeping that promise in a way." "So this is obligation." Grace didn't know why that stung, but it did. "No," Isaac's response was firm. "I wouldn't have offered if I didn't want to. Samuel's request just gave me the push I needed." "Why did you need a push?" Isaac stood, picking up his bowl. "I should get back to work." "Fence won't mend itself." He was gone before Grace could respond, leaving her alone with more questions than answers. The days fell into a pattern. Isaac rose before dawn and worked until dark, stopping only for the meals Grace prepared. They spoke little, their conversations limited to practical matters. What supplies they needed, which fields required attention, how the chickens were laying. Isaac was unfailingly polite but distant, like a boarder in his own home. Grace tried to make herself useful. She tended the chickens, gathered eggs, worked in the vegetable garden that grew behind the house. She cooked 3 meals a day, washed clothes in the creek, mended Isaac's worn shirts. As her pregnancy advanced, the work became harder, but she pushed through, determined to earn her keep. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Grace was hanging laundry when a wave of dizziness struck her. She gripped the clothesline, waiting for it to pass, but instead the world tilted and went dark. She woke on the narrow bed, with Isaac's worried face hovering above her. "Easy," he said when she tried to sit up. "You fainted." "I'm fine. I just stood up too quickly. You're working too hard." Isaac's jaw was set in a stubborn line. "Doctor's coming out tomorrow to check on you. That's not necessary. I can't afford a doctor. You're my wife." "Your health is my responsibility." He stood. "Stay in bed for the rest of the day. I'll finish the laundry." "Isaac, that's women's work." He looked back at her, something almost like amusement in his eyes. "I've been doing my own laundry for 4 years. I think I can manage." The doctor, a grizzled old man named Patterson, examined Grace the next day and pronounced her healthy but overworked. "She's too thin," he told Isaac bluntly. "Pregnant women need extra food, not less, and she shouldn't be doing heavy labor, light work only." After the doctor left, Isaac looked at Grace with something like guilt. "I didn't realize. I should have been paying more attention." "I'm not fragile," Grace protested. "You're growing a child. That takes strength." Isaac ran a hand through his hair. "From now on, no more hauling water or washing heavy things. I'll do it." "And what am I supposed to do all day? Rest, read, sew baby clothes?" Isaac's voice softened. "Let me take care of you, Grace. That's part of our arrangement." Something in his tone made Grace look at him more closely. In the weeks they'd lived together, she'd noticed things about Isaac. How he always served her first at meals. how he'd reinforced the porch steps when he noticed her having trouble with them, how he left wildflowers on the table sometimes, never mentioning them but clearly having picked them for her, small kindnesses that went beyond a business arrangement. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." October brought cold winds from the mountains and the first dusting of snow. Grace's belly had grown round and obvious. Isaac had bought soft fabric in town, and she spent her afternoons sewing tiny gowns and blankets for the baby. Sometimes, as she worked, Isaac would read aloud from one of his books. He had a good voice for reading, deep and steady, and he seemed to enjoy sharing the stories. One evening, as Grace struggled to reach her feet to put on her shoes, Isaac set down his book and knelt before her. Without asking permission, he slipped her shoes onto her swollen feet and laced them with gentle efficiency. "You don't have to do that," Grace whispered. Isaac looked up at her, still kneeling. "I know." Their eyes held for a long moment. Grace felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. Isaac's hand still rested on her ankle, his touch careful and respectful, and she found herself wishing, almost guiltily, that he would touch her with something more than obligation. The moment broke when Isaac stood abruptly and returned to his chair. But that night, Grace lay awake long after he'd settled by the fire, her mind churning with confused emotions. She'd loved Samuel, she still loved his memory. But Samuel was gone, and Isaac was here, solid and real and impossibly kind. Was it wrong to notice the way Isaac's eyes crinkled when he almost smiled? To appreciate the strength in his shoulders as he worked? To feel safe in a way she'd never felt with Samuel, who'd been charming but unreliable? November arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. Isaac spent more time in the house, working on indoor projects, building a cradle for the baby, repairing tack, carving wooden spoons. Grace found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the skill of his hands. One afternoon, the baby kicked hard enough to make Grace gasp. Isaac was on his feet instantly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The baby's just active today." On impulse, Grace reached for his hand. "Here, feel." She pressed his palm against the side of her belly where the baby was moving. Isaac's eyes went wide as he felt the small kicks and rolls beneath his hand. "That's incredible," he breathed. His hand remained gentle on her belly, his expression full of wonder. "Does it hurt?" "No, it's strange but not painful." Grace covered his hand with hers, keeping it in place. Samuel never got to feel this. Isaac's expression changed, becoming more guarded. He started to pull away, but Grace held his hand firm. "Isaac, can I ask you something, I suppose? Why have you never married before? You're a good man, you have land, a home." Surely women in town would have been interested. Isaac was quiet for so long Grace thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "I was engaged once, before the war. Her name was Margaret. She promised to wait for me." He stared at his hand on Grace's belly, not meeting her eyes. "I was gone 3 years. When I came back, she'd married a banker who'd bought his way out of service. She said she couldn't wait forever for a man who might never return. I'm sorry." "Don't be." She was right to move on. War changes a man. I came back different than I left. Isaac finally looked up, his eyes haunted. "I've seen things, done things that gave me nightmares for years. I didn't think I deserved a normal life after that. Didn't think I was fit for decent company." Grace's throat tightened with emotion. "And now I have a reason to get up in the morning, a purpose beyond just surviving." His hand moved slightly on her belly as the baby kicked again. "You've given me that, Grace. You and this child." "The child isn't yours," Grace felt compelled to point out, though something in her wished it were. "No," Isaac agreed. "But I'll raise it as mine if you'll let me. I'll teach it to ride and rope. how to read the weather and respect the land. I'll be the father it needs." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks before she could stop them. Isaac's face filled with alarm. "What did I say? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't upset me." Grace wiped at her tears with her free hand. "It's just that Samuel was so excited about the baby, but he never talked about the actual work of being a father. You're offering to raise another man's child, and you've thought more about what that means than the child's own father did." Isaac gently extracted his hand from her belly and from her grip. "Get some rest. I need to check on the horses." He left the house quickly, and Grace realized she'd said too much. She'd compared him to Samuel, and the comparison had made Samuel come up lacking. It felt like a betrayal of the man she'd loved, the man whose child she carried. But it was also the truth. That night, a blizzard rolled down from the mountains. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows. Isaac made sure the fire stayed high and checked on Grace every few hours, though he still slept by the hearth instead of sharing the bed. Around midnight, Grace woke to the sound of him crying out in his sleep. She rose, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders, and found him thrashing on his makeshift bed, his face twisted in anguish. "Isaac." She knelt beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Isaac, wake up." His eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. For a moment he didn't recognize her. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to hurt. "It's me," Grace said firmly. "You're safe. You're home." Awareness crept back into Isaac's eyes. He released her wrist immediately, sitting up with a gasp. "God, Grace, I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? I'm fine." She sat back on her heels, studying his face in the firelight. Sweat dampened his hair, and he was trembling slightly. "Bad dream. The war." Isaac scrubbed his hands over his face. "I don't have them as often anymore, but sometimes when the wind sounds like cannon fire, it all comes back." Without thinking, Grace reached out and took his hand. "Tell me." "You don't want to hear it." "Yes, I do." So Isaac talked. He told her about battles whose names she recognized from newspapers: Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg. He told her about friends who died in his arms, about the constant fear and exhaustion, about coming home to find the woman he loved married to someone else. He talked until the words ran dry, and when he finally fell silent, Grace was crying again. "You've been carrying all of that alone," she whispered. "Who else would I tell?" Isaac's laugh was bitter. "People in town don't want to hear about the war. They want to forget it happened. I want to know." Grace squeezed his hand. "I want to know everything about you." Isaac looked at her, really looked at her, and Grace saw the exact moment something changed in his eyes. The careful distance he'd maintained crumbled, replaced by raw emotion. "Grace," he said, his voice breaking on her name, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "This arrangement, this marriage, it stopped being just business for me weeks ago." He raised his free hand as if to touch her face, then dropped it. "I wake up every morning grateful you're here. I go to sleep every night wishing I had the right to hold you. When I feel that baby kick, I don't think about Samuel. I think about how I'd give anything to be that child's real father." Grace's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. "Isaac." "I know I have no right," he continued, the words tumbling out now like he couldn't stop them. "You loved Samuel. You're carrying his child. I'm just the man who gave you a name and a roof, but I can't help how I feel. You've given me a reason to live, Grace, a reason to be better than I was." "Stop," Grace said softly. When he fell silent, looking devastated, she moved closer. "You think you have no right to feel this way. I've been feeling the same thing for weeks and hating myself for it." Isaac's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I loved Samuel, but he's gone. And you're here, and you're real, and you're the kindest man I've ever known." Grace placed his hand back on her belly, where the baby had started moving again. I'm saying that when this baby kicks, I imagine you teaching it to walk, to ride, to be brave like you are. I'm saying that I don't want you to sleep by the fire anymore. Grace, I won't take advantage. You're vulnerable right now, and I won't." She kissed him, cutting off his noble refusal. It was awkward, given her pregnant belly, and brief, but it silenced him effectively. "I'm not vulnerable," Grace said when she pulled back. "I'm certain. I care about you, Isaac Foster, more than I probably should given the circumstances, but I can't help it either." Isaac's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Are you sure? Because once I let myself love you properly, I won't be able to stop. I'll be yours completely." "Then love me," Grace whispered. "Please." Isaac kissed her then, properly this time, with all the pent-up longing of months of careful distance. His lips were gentle but sure, and Grace felt warmth spread through her entire body. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I'll take care of you," he murmured. "Both of you, I promise. I know you will." They settled together in front of the fire, Grace wrapped in Isaac's arms, the baby rolling between them. Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside, Grace felt safer and more content than she had since before Samuel's death. "Tell me something happy," she said. "Something from before the war." Isaac thought for a moment. "My mother used to make apple pie every Sunday. She'd let me help peel the apples, and I always ate more than made it into the pie. My father would pretend to be angry, but he'd be laughing. What happened to them? Fever took them both when I was 16. I worked on neighboring farms until the war started." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "I haven't had family in a long time." "You have family now," Grace said firmly. "Me and the baby, we're yours." Isaac pressed a kiss to her hair. "Yes, you are." They talked through the night, sharing stories from their lives. Grace told him about growing up in Cincinnati, about her stern father and gentle mother, about the brother who'd been her best friend until she'd chosen Samuel over family approval. Isaac talked about his childhood in Kansas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the dreams he'd had before the war changed everything. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, they were still entwined by the dying fire. Grace's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she'd never felt more awake, more alive. "We should sleep," Isaac said softly. "Together?" Grace asked, hoping she wasn't being too bold. Isaac smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look years younger. "Together." He helped her to the bedroom and settled her in the bed before lying down beside her, careful not to jostle her too much. Grace curled into his warmth, her back against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her belly. "This is where you should have been sleeping all along," she murmured. "I was trying to be honorable. You've been honorable enough. Now just be my husband." Isaac's lips brushed the nape of her neck. "Yes, madam." Grace fell asleep smiling. The winter passed in a blur of contentment Grace had never expected to find. Isaac remained respectful of her condition, his affection expressed through tender kisses and gentle touches rather than anything more intimate. But the emotional intimacy they shared was profound. They talked for hours every evening, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. Isaac read to her from his small library, and Grace taught him songs her mother had sung to her as a child. When Grace's belly grew so large she could barely move, Isaac waited on her hand and foot. He brought her breakfast in bed, helped her dress when she couldn't reach her boots, rubbed her aching back without being asked. He talked to the baby too, pressing his mouth to Grace's belly and telling stories about the ranch, the horses, the life they would build together. "You're going to love it here," he told the unborn child one evening. "We'll teach you to ride when you're big enough. We'll show you how to find arrowheads in the creek and watch for eagles in the mountains. Your mother and I will make sure you grow up strong and loved." Grace ran her fingers through his hair as he talked, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what she'd left Ohio for, not Samuel's charm or his promises, but this bone-deep sense of belonging, of being cherished exactly as she was. In late December, Grace's pain started. Isaac rode through a snowstorm to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Harper who delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Isaac stayed by Grace's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. "You're doing so well," he told her during a particularly bad contraction. "You're the strongest person I know." "I can't do this," Grace gasped, exhausted beyond measure. "Yes, you can. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a lusty cry, Isaac's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Harper cleaned the infant and placed him in Grace's arms. "He's perfect," Grace whispered, studying the tiny face. The baby had dark hair like Samuel's, but his eyes, when they fluttered open, were hazel instead of brown. Isaac sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Grace, his other hand gently touching the baby's impossibly small fingers. "He's beautiful. You're both beautiful. What should we name him?" Grace asked. They'd discussed this, but hadn't decided. Isaac was quiet for a moment. What about Samuel Isaac, to honor his father but give him a future too? Fresh tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "You do that, give him Samuel's name. He deserves to know who his father was. Samuel was a good man who loved you. This boy should carry that name with pride." Isaac kissed her temple. "But the middle name is mine if you don't mind, because I'm going to be the one who raises him." "Samuel Isaac Foster," Grace said, testing the sound. "It's perfect, Mrs." Harper stayed for 3 days to make sure both Grace and the baby were healthy before heading back to town. During that time, Isaac barely slept, jumping up at every whimper to check on them. He learned to change diapers with surprising efficiency, and wasn't above walking the floor with the baby at 3 in the morning when Samuel wouldn't settle. "You're a natural father," Grace told him one morning, watching him cradle the tiny infant against his broad chest. "I'm terrified I'll break him," Isaac admitted. "He's so small, you won't break him, you're gentle." Isaac looked down at the baby, his expression soft with love. "I never thought I'd have this, a family of my own. I'd given up on the idea. Well, now you're stuck with us." "Best thing that ever happened to me." Isaac looked up, meeting her eyes. "Both of you." As Grace recovered her strength, they settled into a new routine. Isaac still worked the ranch, but he came in frequently to check on them. Grace nursed the baby and gradually took over the household tasks again, though Isaac still insisted on doing the heavy work. Little Samuel proved to be a content baby, sleeping well and eating heartily. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and painting the prairie with wildflowers. On Grace's first venture outside after the birth, she stood in the sunshine and breathed in the clean air, feeling alive in a way she hadn't since Samuel's death. Isaac came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "How do you feel?" "Happy." She leaned back against him. "Truly happy." "Good." He turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "Grace, I need to ask you something." "What?" "I know we're already married, legally speaking, but that was a business arrangement made out of necessity. I want to do it right this time." He took both her hands. "I want to renew our vows in front of the whole town if you're willing, and mean every word. I want everyone to know that I choose you, not out of obligation, but because I love you with everything I am." Grace's vision blurred with happy tears. "You want to marry me again?" "I want to marry you properly. I want to stand in that church and promise to love, honor, and cherish you for the rest of my life. I want to mean it when I say till death do us part, because that's how long I plan to love you." Isaac's voice was rough with emotion. "Will you marry me, Grace?" Again, but for real this time. "Yes," Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married again on a sunny day in May, with what seemed like the entire population of Fort Bridger in attendance. Grace wore a new dress Isaac had commissioned from the dressmaker, pale yellow with white lace. Isaac wore a new suit that made him look so handsome Grace could barely breathe. Little Samuel, now 4 months old, slept in the arms of Mrs. Harper during the ceremony. This time, when the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Isaac did so thoroughly, to the whoops and applause of the gathered crowd. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Grace felt like her heart might actually burst from joy. At the reception held in the town hall, people came up to congratulate them and admire the baby. Grace noticed several women who'd cut her dead after Samuel's death now smiling and cooing over little Samuel. It should have bothered her, their hypocrisy, but she found she didn't care. She had Isaac's love, and that was worth more than all their approval. "You look happy," a voice said beside her. Grace turned to find an older woman she didn't recognize. "I am happy. I can see that. And Isaac, he looks like a different man than the one who used to come to town last year." "Love suits him." The woman smiled. "I'm Judith Kimball. I run the mercantile. I just wanted to say that you're good for him. He was lost before you came along." "He saved me," Grace said honestly. "Sounds like you saved each other." Judith patted her arm. "That's what the best marriages are. Two people making each other better." That night, after they'd returned to the ranch and put Samuel to bed in his cradle, Isaac finally carried Grace over the threshold the way he should have done months ago. He set her down gently in the bedroom and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said simply. "I need you to know that. I do know. And I love you too." Grace rose on her tiptoes to kiss him. "I think I've loved you since that first day when you offered me hope when I had none." "You gave me hope too. You gave me everything." Isaac kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Let me show you how much you mean to me." That night their marriage became complete in every way. Isaac was gentle and patient, treating Grace like something precious. Afterward, lying in his arms with the moonlight streaming through the window, Grace felt a peace she'd never known. "Are you happy?" Isaac murmured into her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." The years that followed were good ones, filled with hard work and simple joys. The ranch prospered under Isaac's careful management. They added cattle to their holdings, then sheep. The homestead expanded: a larger barn, a smokehouse, a root cellar. Isaac proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and soon people came from miles around to buy foster horses. Little Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed Isaac everywhere, imitating his walk and his mannerisms. Isaac taught him to ride at age 3, to rope at 5, to read the weather and track animals. But he also read to him every night, taught him arithmetic and history, made sure he grew up with both practical skills and book learning. When Samuel was 2, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Iris, with Isaac's gray eyes and Grace's auburn hair. 2 years after that came twin boys, Matthew and Marcus, who kept Grace busy chasing after them. Isaac built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and Grace filled the rooms with laughter and love. Through it all, Isaac remained the steady center of their family. He worked hard but always made time for his children, teaching them, playing with them, listening to their childish troubles with grave attention. With Grace, he was unfailingly affectionate, stealing kisses when she passed him in the yard, holding her close every night, telling her he loved her so often she never had reason to doubt it. One evening, when Samuel was 8, he asked the question Grace had been dreading. "Pa, why do I have dark hair when you have light hair? And why are my eyes different?" Isaac set down the harness he'd been mending and pulled Samuel onto his lap, though the boy was getting almost too big for it. Grace stood in the doorway, her heart in her throat. "You have different hair and eyes because your birth father was a different man," Isaac said calmly. "His name was Samuel Gerard, and he was a good, brave man who loved your mother very much." The boy's eyes widened. "You're not my real pa. I'm as real as they come," Isaac said firmly. "I may not have given you life, but I've given you everything else. I was there when you were born. I walked the floor with you when you cried. I taught you to ride and to read. I love you as much as I love Iris and the twins. You're my son in every way that matters." Samuel processed this, his young face serious. "What happened to my birth father? He died before you were born. He would have loved you very much if he'd had the chance. But you love me anyway, even though I'm not really yours." Isaac's arms tightened around the boy. "You are really mine." "Blood doesn't make a family, Samuel. Love does. And I've loved you from the moment you were born. That makes you mine." Samuel thought about this, then nodded. "Okay, can I still call you Pa?" "You better," Isaac said gruffly. "I'm the only father you've got." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Grace found Isaac standing on the porch, staring out at the moonlit prairie. "Are you all right?" she asked, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "I was just thinking about how different my life might have been if you hadn't needed help that day in Fort Bridger." Isaac turned in her arms, pulling her close. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to actually live." "You gave me that too," Grace said. "You saved me when I had nothing and no one. You gave me a name, a home, a family. You gave me love when I thought I'd lost my chance at it forever. We saved each other." Isaac kissed her softly. "Best decision I ever made, offering to marry you. Best decision I ever made, saying yes." They stood together in the cool night air, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of their ranch. Horses nickering in the barn, the distant call of a coyote, the wind sighing through the cottonwoods. Inside the house, their children slept safely, unaware of the complicated history that had brought their family together. Grace thought about the scared, pregnant woman she'd been, standing in the street with a single carpet bag, facing an uncertain future. That woman couldn't have imagined the life she had now. A husband who adored her, 4 healthy children, a prosperous ranch, respect in the community. She'd thought her life was over when Samuel died, but really it had just been beginning. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, reading her mood as he always could. "How grateful I am. For all of this. For you." "Show me," Isaac said, a hint of mischief in his voice. Grace laughed and pulled him back inside, toward their bedroom. Even after years of marriage, the passion between them hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, seasoned with trust and friendship and shared history. As the years continued to pass, the Foster family became a fixture in the Fort Bridger community. Grace helped establish a school, teaching children whose families couldn't afford to send them away for education. Isaac served on the town council, using his steady judgment to help settle disputes and plan for the town's future. Young Samuel grew into a fine young man, with his birth father's charm and his adoptive father's steadiness. At 18, he announced his intention to study law, and Isaac paid for him to attend university in the East. Iris proved to have a gift for healing and apprenticed with old Dr. Patterson. The twins took to ranching like they'd been born to it, and Isaac began teaching them the business side of running the operation. When Grace turned 40, Isaac surprised her with a trip to Cincinnati to visit her family. She'd been estranged from them for over 20 years, but Isaac had tracked them down through old letters and corresponded with her mother. The reunion was emotional. Grace's parents had aged considerably, and her mother wept at the sight of her long-lost daughter. Her father was stiffer, but even he softened when he met Isaac and heard about the life they'd built together. "I was wrong," he said to Grace before they left. "I thought you were throwing your life away, running off to Wyoming with that cowhand, but you found something real. This man, this life, it's good. I'm proud of you." Grace cried all the way back to Wyoming, but they were happy tears. Isaac held her hand the entire train ride, offering silent support as she processed the healing of old wounds. Back home, their life continued its steady rhythm. The children married and had children of their own. Samuel brought home a smart young woman from his university and started a law practice in Cheyenne. Iris married Dr. Patterson's nephew, and they took over the medical practice together. The twins both married local girls and built houses on the ranch property, planning to take over the operation eventually. Isaac's hair turned gray, then white, and Grace's auburn locks faded to silver. But their love never diminished. Isaac still brought her wildflowers. Grace still made his favorite foods and darned his socks. They still sat together on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren running everywhere, filling the house with noise and chaos. Grace looked around at the faces she loved and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Quite a crew we've got," Isaac said, coming up beside her with 2 glasses of punch. "They're wonderful," Grace agreed, taking a glass. "All of them." "We did good," Isaac said with satisfaction. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Isaac and Grace sat alone by the fire just as they had on that first night when they'd admitted their feelings. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Taking on another man's pregnant fiancé, you could have had an easier life." Isaac looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Easier, maybe, but not better, never better." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in the familiar gesture he'd done thousands of times. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Foster. You and all those babies you gave me. I've never regretted a single day." "Not even when the twins put that snake in our bed," Isaac laughed. "Well, maybe that day, but overall no regrets." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Isaac, more now than even when we first married. That's how it should be, love that grows instead of fading." Isaac kissed her hair. "I plan to love you until my last breath, and if there's anything after that, I'll love you there too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, a spring storm was brewing, thunder rumbling in the distance. But inside, all was warm and safe. Grace thought about the path that had led her here, the grief, the fear, the desperation. She thought about Isaac's unexpected offer, his patient kindness, the way he'd loved her unwanted child as his own. She thought about how close she'd come to refusing his proposal, to walking out of Fort Bridger alone and ruined. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a name when I needed one, for giving me a home, for giving me a reason to live when I thought my life was over." Isaac turned her face toward his eyes serious. "You gave me the same thing. I was just going through the motions before you came along. You made me want to be better, to build something worth having. You gave me purpose." "We saved each other," Grace said, echoing his words from years ago. "Yes, we did." Isaac kissed her, a soft press of lips that still made her heart flutter even after 3 decades. "Best trade I ever made." As the storm broke outside, rain drumming on the roof and lightning illuminating the sky. Isaac and Grace went to bed in the room they'd shared for 30 years. They held each other close, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful together. Grace fell asleep thinking about how strange life was, how tragedy could lead to unexpected blessings. She'd come to Wyoming to marry one man and ended up with another, better man. Samuel Gerard had given her a child, but Isaac Foster had given her a life, a family, a love that sustained her through every hardship. Years continued to roll by with gentle predictability. Isaac eventually retired from active ranch work, turning operations over to the twins while he consulted and advised. He and Grace spent more time traveling, visiting their scattered children and growing collection of grandchildren. When they were both in their 60s, they took a trip to Kansas so Isaac could show Grace where he'd grown up. They visited his parents' graves and the farm where he'd learned to ride. Isaac told her stories from his childhood, filling in details he'd never mentioned before. "I always wanted to bring my family here," he said, standing in front of the old farmhouse. "Show my wife where I came from. I used to think I'd do it with Margaret, but I'm glad it's you instead. You understand me in a way she never did." Grace squeezed his hand. "You've shown me your past, your pain, your dreams. I know you better than I know myself sometimes. Same here." Isaac pulled her close, not caring who might see. "You're the other half of my soul, Grace. You always have been." Back in Wyoming, they settled into the rhythm of their later years. Isaac's health began to fail slowly, his joints stiff with arthritis, his breathing sometimes labored. But his mind stayed sharp and his love stayed constant. Grace nursed him through his bad days and celebrated his good ones, never complaining about the burden of care. On a warm summer evening when Isaac was 70 and Grace was 68, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Isaac's breathing was worse than usual, but he'd insisted on coming outside. "This is my favorite place," he said, looking out over the land he'd tamed and the family he'd built. "Right here with you." "Mine too," Grace agreed, though worry gnawed at her. He'd been declining faster lately and she knew what it meant. "Promise me something," Isaac said suddenly. "Anything. When I'm gone, don't grieve too long. You've got years left in you. Live them fully." "Isaac, I mean it." He turned to look at her, his eyes still that same stormy gray despite the years. "You gave me 36 wonderful years. That's more than most people get. But you deserve to enjoy the time you have left. Watch our grandchildren grow. Tend your garden. Be happy." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "I don't know how to be happy without you." "Sure you do. You've got a strength in you that most people never find. You'll be sad for a while, but then you'll remember how to smile again. And when you do, I'll be smiling too, wherever I am." Isaac died 3 days later in his sleep, with Grace holding his hand. The whole town turned out for his funeral. Young Samuel, now a prominent lawyer, gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears. He talked about the man who'd chosen to be his father, who'd taught him what real strength looked like, who'd shown him that love was a choice you made every day. Grace stood at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and felt like half her soul had been torn away. But even in her grief, she felt grateful. Not everyone got to experience a love like theirs. Not everyone found a partner who saw them at their worst and loved them anyway. In the weeks after Isaac's death, Grace sorted through his things. She found letters he'd written but never sent, all addressed to her, expressing his love in words he'd been too shy to say aloud. She found the first wildflowers he'd ever picked for her, pressed and preserved in a book. She found a journal he'd kept, documenting every major moment in their children's lives, his pride and love evident on every page, and she found a letter addressed to her, marked to be opened after I'm gone. With shaking hands, Grace opened it. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, I've left you behind, and I'm sorrier for that than I can say. You were the light of my life, the reason I got up every morning, the purpose behind everything I did. Loving you was the greatest privilege of my existence. I know you'll grieve, and that's right and proper. Grieve for me, miss me. I'll miss you too wherever I am. But don't let grief consume you. You have so much life left to live, so much love left to give. Our children and grandchildren need you. The world needs your kindness, your strength, your laugh. Remember what I told you that first night when we admitted our feelings. You gave me a reason to live. You took a broken, lonely man and made him whole again. You gave me a family, a purpose, a joy I'd never known. Every day with you was a gift. Now I'm asking you to do the same thing for yourself. Find new reasons to live, not to replace what we had, but to honor it. Live fully, love completely, and know that every happy moment you have makes me happy too. I'll be waiting for you whenever you're ready to join me. Until then, live for both of us. All my love forever and always. Isaac. Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket, close to her heart. She could almost hear Isaac's voice speaking the words, could almost feel his arms around her. All right, she said aloud to the empty room, or perhaps to Isaac's spirit. I'll try. For you, I'll try. Grace lived another 15 years, true to her promise. She didn't remarry. What she'd had with Isaac was irreplaceable, but she didn't lock herself away in grief either. She continued teaching, started a lending library in Fort Bridger, and helped establish a church in town. She welcomed new grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each one a testament to the love she and Isaac had shared. She told stories about Isaac to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who hadn't known him. She made sure everyone knew about the man who'd married a desperate pregnant woman to give her a name, who'd loved another man's child as his own, who'd built a legacy of kindness and strength. On the anniversary of Isaac's death each year, Grace would visit his grave and tell him about the year that had passed. She'd update him on the children, the ranch, the town. She'd tell him she loved him and missed him, but that she was doing okay, just like she'd promised. When Grace was 83, she became ill with pneumonia. Her children gathered around her bed just as she'd gathered around Isaac's. Young Samuel, now a distinguished man with silver in his hair, held her hand. "We love you, Mama," he said. "Thank you for everything you gave us." "Take care of each other," Grace whispered. "Family is everything. Your father taught me that." "Which father?" Samuel asked gently. Grace smiled. "Both of them. Samuel Gerard gave me you, and that was a precious gift. But Isaac Foster gave me a life worth living. I've been blessed with both." That night, Grace dreamed of the ranch as it had been in its prime. The house full of children, the fields green and productive, the horses running in the pasture. And there, on the porch, stood Isaac, young and strong and smiling. "Took you long enough," he said, holding out his hand. "I had promises to keep," Grace replied, taking his hand and feeling young again herself. "I know, I watched. You did good. We did good. Yes, we did." Isaac pulled her close, and Grace felt at home for the first time since he died. Ready to rest now, with you, always. Grace Foster died peacefully in her sleep that night, surrounded by the family she and Isaac had built together. She was buried beside Isaac, under the cottonwood trees near the creek, on the land they'd loved. Her obituary, written by her son Samuel, told the story of a woman who'd come to Wyoming territory with nothing and built everything. It mentioned her charity work, her teaching, her contributions to the community. But the final line was what mattered most. Grace Foster was preceded in death by her beloved husband Isaac, to whom she was devoted for 36 years. In life and in death, they were inseparable. She leaves behind 4 children, 17 grandchildren, and 32 great-grandchildren, all testaments to a love that transformed 2 broken people into a family that will endure for generations. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the twins and their children. The Foster name became synonymous with quality horses and fair dealing. The house that Isaac built and Grace filled with love stood for another century, sheltering generations of their descendants. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, people swear they can see 2 figures on the old porch. A tall man with gentle eyes and a woman with auburn hair going silver, sitting together and watching the sunset over the mountains they loved, their hands intertwined, their love eternal. The story of the cowboy who married a woman to give her a name, and she who gave him a reason to live, became local legend. It was told to children as an example of how love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, how choosing kindness could change everything, how 2 broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful from the ruins of tragedy. In Fort Bridger, Wyoming, where it all began, a plaque was eventually placed in the town square, commemorating Isaac and Grace Foster's contributions to the community. But their real legacy wasn't in buildings or businesses. It was in the love they'd shared, the family they'd built, and the proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the choices we make in our darkest moments. Grace had stood in a dusty street with nothing but a carpetbag and a pregnancy that would ruin her, and Isaac had offered her hope when she had none. That single act of kindness had rippled outward, creating waves that touched hundreds of lives. Every child they raised, every grandchild they held, every lesson they taught, every kindness they showed, all of it stemmed from that one moment when a lonely cowboy decided to help a desperate woman. And in the end, that's what mattered. Not the hardships they'd faced or the obstacles they'd overcome, but the love they'd chosen and the life they'd built together. They'd saved each other, healed each other, and loved each other through everything life threw at them. Their story became a reminder that love isn't always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it's a quiet choice made over and over again, day after day, until those choices build something strong enough to last forever. Isaac Foster chose Grace Kelley in a dusty Wyoming street, and she chose him back. Everything else, the ranch, the children, the decades of happiness, flowed from that single, simple choice. And that, in the end, was the truest kind of love there was.